Mother and 15-year-old daughter vanished from their desert camp in Arizona in 2017. Tent still zipped from inside, camping gear untouched, but both Sarah and Emma were gone without any trace. But 7 years later, in 2024, what a rock climber found wedged deep inside a narrow canyon wall, crack 200 feet down, changed everything investigators thought they knew about this case. Sarah Martinez had been planning this camping trip for months. Her daughter Emma was turning 16 soon, and Sarah knew their time together was slipping away. College applications, boyfriends, part-time jobs. Emma was growing up fast. This desert camping trip to Antelope Canyon in Arizona was supposed to be their chance to reconnect. They arrived at the remote campsite on a Friday afternoon in October 2017. The autumn desert was perfect. Warm days, cool nights, and endless star-filled skies. Sarah had chosen this spot carefully. It was isolated enough for real mother-daughter bonding, but close enough to the main trail that they'd be safe. Emma, despite her teenage protests about being dragged into the wilderness, was actually excited. She'd always loved camping as a little girl, and part of her missed those simpler times with her mom. They set up their tent on level ground near some large boulders that would provide wind protection. That first evening went perfectly. They hiked the nearby canyon trails, took photos of the red rock formations, and cooked dinner over their camp stove. As darkness fell, they sat outside their tent talking about Emma's plans for college, her dreams of studying photography, and how proud Sarah was of the young woman her daughter was becoming. Around 10 p.m., they climbed into their shared tent. Sarah zipped it shut from the inside, as she always did for security. They talked quietly for another hour before falling asleep, with Emma curled up in her sleeping bag next to her mother. But when morning came, everything changed. Sarah never woke up. The tent was discovered by other campers around 9 a.m., still perfectly zipped shut from the inside. When they called out and got no response, they contacted park rangers. What the rangers found inside defied explanation. The tent was empty. Both sleeping bags were still laid out exactly as they should be. Sarah's backpack sat untouched in the corner. Emma's camera was still where she'd left it the night before. Even their water bottles were sitting right where they'd placed them. But Sarah and Emma were gone. The zipper was still pulled tight from the inside. There were no cuts in the tent fabric, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had ever left through the tent walls. Yet somehow, both women had vanished completely. Search teams arrived within hours. They combed every inch of the surrounding desert and canyon. Dogs tracked their scent to the tent, and then nothing. The scent trail simply ended at their campsite, as if they'd never left. But that was just the beginning of the mystery. Investigators found Emma's journal inside the tent. The last entry was from that Friday night, written just before they went to sleep. "Mom and I actually had fun today. I'm glad she made me come. Sometimes I forget how much I love her. Tomorrow, we're going to hike deeper into the canyon." That hike never happened. The investigation expanded rapidly. FBI agents joined local law enforcement. They interviewed every camper who'd been in the area, checked traffic cameras for hundreds of miles, and analyzed cell phone data. Sarah's phone was found in the tent, powered off. Emma's phone was missing. Theories emerged quickly. Maybe they'd left the tent early for a sunrise hike and gotten lost. But their hiking boots were still in the tent. Maybe someone had abducted them while they slept. But how could an abductor get them out of a tent zipped from the inside without leaving any trace? The more investigators dug, the stranger things became. Security footage from the nearest gas station, 40 miles away, showed no sign of Sarah's car leaving the area. The park entrance cameras confirmed they'd arrived Friday afternoon, but never captured them leaving. It was as if they'd simply evaporated. Sarah's ex-husband, Emma's father, was questioned extensively. He had an airtight alibi. He was at a work conference in Chicago with hundreds of witnesses. Besides, he and Sarah had maintained a friendly relationship even after their divorce 3 years earlier. Friends described Sarah as a careful, responsible woman who would never take unnecessary risks with her daughter's safety. Emma was a smart, level-headed teenager who wouldn't wander off alone in the desert, especially not without her boots. As weeks passed with no leads, the case began to haunt everyone involved. Detective Maria Santos had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, but she'd never encountered anything like this. The tent was like a sealed room mystery, she later told reporters. 2 people disappeared from inside a space with only one exit, and that exit was still locked from the inside. The family hired private investigators. Volunteers organized massive search parties. Emma's photo appeared on missing persons websites and milk cartons across the Southwest. But as months turned into years, hope began to fade. Sarah's mother, Emma's grandmother, never stopped believing they'd return. She kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them, paid Sarah's cell phone bill just in case, and organized annual memorial hikes to the campsite. "They're out there somewhere," she would say. "I can feel it." But as time passed, even the most dedicated investigators began to accept that Sarah and Emma Martinez were likely dead, their bodies lost somewhere in the vast Arizona desert. The case file grew cold. New missing persons cases demanded attention. The Martinez disappearance became another unsolved mystery in a state full of them. Then, 7 years later, everything changed. On a bright March morning in 2024, professional rock climber Jake Morrison was exploring an advanced route in Antelope Canyon, about 2 miles from where Sarah and Emma had camped. Jake was an experienced climber who specialized in technical rescues for the Park Service. He'd been climbing these canyon walls for over a decade. He was working his way down a particularly challenging section when he noticed something wedged in a narrow crack in the rock face, about 200 feet below the canyon rim. At first, he thought it might be debris blown there by wind. But as he rappelled closer, his heart stopped. It was a journal, a small, leather-bound book jammed so tightly into the crack that it would have taken considerable force to place it there. Jake carefully extracted the journal and opened it. The first page made his hands shake. Property of Emma Martinez, age 15. But this wasn't the journal investigators had found in the tent 7 years earlier. This was a different one, and the entries inside changed everything. The journal contained entries dated after Emma and her mother had vanished, entries that should have been impossible. The first new entry was dated 3 days after their disappearance. "We're not in the desert anymore. I don't know where we are. Mom is scared but trying to hide it. The sky here is different. Wrong. I can see stars that aren't supposed to exist." Jake immediately contacted park rangers who called in the FBI. Within hours, Agent Michael Chen was rappelling down to examine the discovery site firsthand. The location where Jake found the journal was impossible to reach without expert climbing equipment. Even then, wedging something that deeply into the crack would require tremendous force. There was no way Emma could have placed it there, even if she had somehow acquired professional climbing gear. But the entries inside were even more disturbing. Emma's handwriting was unmistakable. Her family confirmed it matched samples they'd provided to investigators years earlier. But the content defied explanation. Day 7. The things that look like people keep watching us. Mom thinks they're trying to communicate, but their voices sound like wind through broken glass. I miss home so much it hurts. Day 15. Found a way to send things back. Don't know if it works. If someone finds this, tell Grandma we love her. Tell her we're trying to come home. Day 23. Mom figured out the rules. She thinks she can get us back, but it requires sacrifice. I told her no, but she has that look in her eyes. The same look she had when Dad left. The entries continued for weeks, describing an environment that couldn't exist on Earth. Emma wrote about crystalline formations that sang in the wind, about gravity that flowed like water, about creatures that might once have been human but had been changed by something beyond understanding. The final entry was the most chilling. Day 31. Mom says she found the way home. She says only one of us can go, but she's wrong. I've been studying the patterns. There's another way. If you find this, look for the circle of stones near our original campsite. Look for the place where the shadows fall upward. We'll be waiting. Agent Chen led a team back to the original campsite immediately. 7 years of weather had changed the landscape, but they found what Emma had described. A perfect circle of red stones about 50 feet from where the tent had been pitched. The stones appeared natural, but their arrangement was too precise to be coincidental. And at certain times of day, when the sun hit them at specific angles, the shadows they cast seemed to bend upward instead of falling to the ground. Ground-penetrating radar revealed an anomaly beneath the circle, something that didn't match the surrounding geology. But excavation attempts failed repeatedly. Every hole they dug would be found filled in the next morning, as if the earth itself was resisting their efforts. The investigation reignited with unprecedented resources. Scientists, archaeologists, and even theoretical physicists were consulted. The journal was analyzed by handwriting experts, paper specialists, and ink dating professionals. Every test confirmed it was authentic. But how could Emma have written entries after she vanished? How could she place a journal in an impossible location? And what did her cryptic final message mean? Local Native American elders were quietly consulted. Some refused to speak about the site at all. Others would only say that certain places in the desert had always been thin, places where the boundary between worlds was fragile. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum physicist brought in to consult on the case, offered a different perspective. If parallel dimensions exist, and if there are points where they intersect with our reality, then theoretically someone could cross between them. The journal could be Emma's attempt to communicate across dimensional barriers. But theory provided little comfort to Emma's grandmother, now 78 and desperate for answers. She began camping at the site regularly, convinced that her granddaughter and daughter were somehow still alive, still trying to come home. Local media coverage brought curiosity seekers from around the world. The campsite became a makeshift shrine with flowers, photos, and handwritten messages left by strangers who'd been touched by the story. Then, on the first anniversary of finding the journal, Jake Morrison made another discovery. He was climbing near the same location when he spotted something new wedged in a different crack, this one about 300 feet down. Another journal. Newer. The entries inside were recent. Year 8. We're still here. Still trying. I'm 23 now, or I think I am. Time moves differently here. Mom hasn't aged a day. Neither have I, really. But I feel older. We found others. People who disappeared from other places, other times. Some have been here for decades, some for centuries. The way home opens sometimes, but it's unpredictable. We've learned to read the signs. When the stars align correctly, when the shadows fall the right way, the circle becomes a doorway, but it only stays open for minutes, and only one person can pass through at a time. We've been taking turns, sending things back, messages, proof that we're alive, hoping someone will understand, hoping someone will figure out how to open the doorway from your side. If you're reading this, then Jake found it. Tell him thank you. Tell him to keep looking for our messages. We're going to try again on the winter solstice. Watch for us at sunset. Watch the circle of stones. The winter solstice was 3 months away. Agent Chen organized a massive surveillance operation. Cameras were positioned around the stone circle. Seismic monitors were installed. Every federal agency with relevant expertise was involved. Emma's grandmother insisted on being there despite her age and failing health. "If my girls are coming home," she said, "I'm going to be there to welcome them." On December 21st, 2024, at exactly 5:47 p.m., something extraordinary happened. The shadows cast by the stone circle began to behave impossibly, bending upward and forming geometric patterns in the air. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Every electronic device within 100 yards malfunctioned simultaneously. And for exactly 93 seconds, 2 figures were visible within the circle. Sarah Martinez looked exactly as she had 7 years earlier. Emma had grown into a young woman, but her face was unmistakably the missing teenager aged 8 years. They stood in the circle, looking out at the assembled crowd, reaching toward them as if pressing against invisible glass. Emma was holding a third journal. She threw it as hard as she could, and impossibly, it materialized outside the circle, landing at her grandmother's feet. Then the shadows snapped back to normal, the temperature returned, and they were gone. The third journal contained detailed instructions. Emma had spent years studying whatever force controlled their prison. She'd learned its rules, found its weaknesses. The winter solstice opening was just the beginning. "The doorway can be opened from your side," she'd written, "but it requires exact timing and specific conditions. The spring equinox, when the sun sets at precisely the right angle. Position mirrors to reflect the light into the circle at the moment the shadows begin to bend. Have someone I love calling my name. The connection between worlds grows stronger when love is the bridge." Emma's grandmother read every word of the instructions aloud to the assembled team. Her voice was steady despite her tears. "We're bringing them home," she said. "Whatever it takes." The spring equinox was 3 months away. 3 months to gather the resources, perfect the timing, and solve a mystery that had challenged every assumption about reality. But for the first time in 7 years, Sarah's mother had real hope. Her daughter and granddaughter were alive. They were fighting to come home, and they'd given her the tools to help them succeed. The stone circle in the Arizona desert had become more than a memorial site or a curiosity. It had become a doorway between worlds. And one way or another, the Martinez family was going to be reunited. The question wasn't whether Sarah and Emma could come home anymore. The question was, what else might follow them through? But that question would have to wait. Emma's grandmother, Patricia Martinez, was not about to let fear stop her from saving her family. In the weeks following the winter solstice sighting, Patricia became the unofficial leader of what media dubbed Operation Homecoming. Despite being 78 years old and battling arthritis, she threw herself into preparing for the spring equinox attempt with the determination of someone half her age. Agent Chen found himself working more closely with Patricia than with his federal supervisors. The elderly woman had an intuitive understanding of the case that years of professional training couldn't match. "She thinks like Emma," he told his partner. "It's like she can feel what they need." The preparations were unlike anything law enforcement had ever attempted. Theoretical physicists worked alongside mirror specialists to calculate exact angles. Astronomers provided precise timing data for the spring equinox sunset. Even NASA became involved, offering satellite imagery to track atmospheric conditions. But the most important element, according to Emma's instructions, was the emotional connection. Someone who loved them had to be calling their names at the exact moment the attempt was made. Patricia practiced every day, standing in the stone circle at sunset, calling out to her daughter and granddaughter. Her voice grew hoarse, but she never stopped. Park rangers grew accustomed to hearing her weathered voice echoing through the canyon as the sun disappeared behind the red rocks. "Sarah! Emma! We're here! We're waiting for you!" Meanwhile, Jake Morrison continued his climbing expeditions, searching for more journals. He'd become personally invested in the case, feeling responsible for giving the family hope. The pressure was enormous. What if the spring equinox attempt failed? What if he'd misinterpreted something in the journals? 3 weeks before the equinox, Jake made another discovery. Not a journal this time, but something that made his blood run cold. Carved into the canyon wall, 250 feet down, were symbols that hadn't been there the week before. Fresh scratches in the red rock, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. When Jake photographed them and showed the images to the research team, 2 physicists immediately left the project. "Those symbols, Doctor," Kim explained to Agent Chen privately, "they represent mathematical concepts that shouldn't exist, geometries that work in dimensions our minds can't process. If Emma carved those, she's learned things about reality that no human should know." The symbols were a warning and a guide. Emma was trying to prepare them for what the doorway opening might unleash. The spring equinox wouldn't just bring Sarah and Emma home. It would create a temporary bridge between their reality and ours. And other things existed in that space between worlds. Patricia refused to be deterred. "I don't care what comes through," she told the assembled team during a planning meeting. "My family has been trapped for 8 years. If demons want to follow them home, we'll deal with demons. But I'm bringing my girls back." Her determination was infectious. The federal team, initially focused on scientific discovery and public safety, began to share her single-minded focus on rescue. They weren't just conducting an experiment anymore. They were saving a family. 2 weeks before the equinox, Emma's father, Sarah's ex-husband David, arrived from Chicago. He'd followed the case obsessively since the journal discoveries, but had been afraid to hope. The winter solstice sighting changed everything. His daughter was alive, and she was coming home. David's relationship with Patricia had been strained since the divorce, but grief and hope united them now. They stood together in the stone circle each evening, calling out to Sarah and Emma, their voices joining in desperate harmony. "We forgive you for leaving," David would say, tears streaming down his face. "Just come home. Please, come home." The media attention intensified as the equinox approached. News crews from around the world descended on the Arizona desert. The story had everything: family drama, scientific mystery, and the possibility of proving that other dimensions existed. But Patricia banned media from the actual rescue site. "This is about bringing my family home," she told reporters firmly, "not about making television." 1 week before the attempt, Jake made his final discovery. Deep in the narrowest part of the canyon, wedged in a crack so tight he had to use specialized tools to extract it, was Emma's final message. This journal was different, newer, more urgent. The handwriting was rushed, sometimes desperate. Time is running out. The barrier between worlds is weakening, not just at our circle but everywhere. The things that have been trapped here for centuries are getting restless. They know the doorway is going to open, and they want out. Some of them used to be human, explorers and travelers who got lost here decades or centuries ago. The dimension changes you over time, makes you into something else. Mom and I have resisted it so far, but we're not sure how much longer we can hold on. We've found the others who disappeared from our world. The climber who vanished in 1987. The family of 4 who disappeared from their RV in 1994. The teenagers who went missing from the hiking trail in 2003. They're all here, but they're not entirely themselves anymore. The ones who've been here longest barely remember being human. They've become something adapted to this place, and they're angry that we're trying to leave. There's going to be a fight when the doorway opens. The changed ones will try to stop us from going home, but there's something else, something worse. The thing that rules this place. It feeds on the energy of people crossing between dimensions. It's been dormant, but our escape attempt is going to wake it up. If the rescue fails, don't try again. Seal the doorway permanently. Whatever happens to us, don't let that thing reach your world. Agent Chen read the journal entry aloud to the assembled team. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Kim was the first to speak. We should abort. If Emma's right, we could be opening a doorway to something catastrophic. But Patricia stood up, her 78-year-old frame somehow radiating unwavering strength. My granddaughter has been fighting to come home for 8 years. She's given us the tools to save her. I don't care what else is waiting on the other side. We're not abandoning them now. David nodded in agreement. Emma knew the risks when she sent that warning. She sent it anyway because she still believes we can succeed. We're not giving up on them. The team voted. Military advisors recommended aborting. Scientists urged caution. Federal authorities worried about public safety. But Jake Morrison cast the deciding vote. Emma saved my life once, he said quietly. I was climbing solo 3 years ago. Got caught in a rock slide. Should have died. Instead, I heard a voice calling out warnings, telling me exactly where to move to avoid the falling rocks. I never saw who it was, but I recognized the voice when I heard the recording of Emma's grandmother calling to them. Emma's been protecting people from that other dimension for years. She's earned the right to come home. The spring equinox preparations continued. On March 20th, 2025, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the most unusual rescue operation in human history commenced. Mirrors were positioned at precise angles around the stone circle, calculated to reflect the setting sun's light into the exact center at the moment of dimensional weakness. Seismic equipment monitored for any changes in the Earth's magnetic field. Emergency medical teams stood ready. Military units were positioned discreetly in case Emma's warnings about hostile entities proved accurate. Patricia stood in the center of the circle, wearing the same jacket Sarah had borrowed from her the day they'd left for their camping trip 8 years earlier. David positioned himself beside her, holding a photo of Emma from her 15th birthday. At 6:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after the moment of perfect equinox, the shadows began to bend. The temperature plummeted, electronics malfunctioned, and the air inside the stone circle began to shimmer like heat waves, but cold instead of warm. Through the dimensional barrier, shapes became visible. Sarah and Emma, standing back to back, surrounded by figures that might once have been human, but were now something else entirely. The changed ones Emma had warned about, former travelers who'd been transformed by years in the other dimension. Behind them all, something vast and dark was stirring. the entity that ruled the space between worlds, awakening to the opened doorway. Patricia began calling their names, her voice carrying across dimensions. "Sarah! Emma! We're here! Come home!" The figures on the other side turned toward her voice. Sarah's face was desperate, hopeful, terrified all at once. Emma had grown into a woman during her 8 years of captivity, but her eyes still held the spark of the teenager she'd been. They began fighting their way toward the barrier, pushing through the changed ones who tried to block their path. But the dark entity behind them was growing larger, more solid, reaching toward the opening with appendages that defied description. The mirrors reflected the setting sunlight perfectly, creating a column of golden light that seemed to strengthen the barrier between dimensions. For a moment, it looked like the plan was working. Then, everything went wrong. The dark entity reached the dimensional barrier and began pushing through. As it made contact with our reality, every piece of electronic equipment for miles began failing. Car engines died on distant highways. Cell phone towers went dark. Even battery-powered devices simply stopped functioning. But Patricia never stopped calling. Her voice, now joined by David's, rang out across the dimensional divide with 8 years of accumulated love and desperation. "Sarah! Emma! Fight! Come home to us!" Sarah and Emma fought with inhuman determination. Whatever they'd learned during their years of captivity, it had made them stronger, more resilient. They broke through the ring of changed ones and reached the barrier. Sarah pressed her hands against the dimensional wall, looking directly at her mother. Her mouth moved, forming words that carried across impossible distances. "Take Emma first. I'll hold them back." But Emma grabbed her mother's hand and shook her head firmly. 8 years of fighting for survival had taught them they were stronger together. They stepped through the barrier together, just as the dark entity's appendages reached the opening. The moment Sarah and Emma's feet touched Arizona soil, Patricia collapsed. The emotional strain of 8 years, followed by the intensity of the rescue, had pushed her body beyond its limits. But she was smiling as David caught her, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I knew you'd come home," she whispered as Sarah and Emma ran to her side. The family reunion lasted exactly 47 seconds before the dark entity pushed far enough through the barrier to manifest partially in our reality. Jake Morrison, watching from his climbing position on the canyon wall, later described it as like watching a nightmare try to squeeze through a doorway too small for it. The entity was vast, composed of shadow and hunger, and the accumulated despair of everyone who'd ever been lost between dimensions. But Emma had spent 8 years studying this creature's weaknesses. As it emerged, she began speaking in a language that hurt to hear, words that seemed to bend space around them. The symbols she'd carved in the canyon wall began glowing with sickly light. "The binding ritual," Sarah explained breathlessly to Agent Chen. "Emma figured out how to trap it between dimensions, but it only works once, and only if someone who's crossed over performs it." The entity fought against Emma's binding spell, its rage shaking the ground and causing rock slides throughout the canyon. But Emma had learned its true name during her captivity, and names have power in the space between worlds. With a sound like reality tearing, the entity was pulled back through the dimensional barrier. Emma collapsed from the effort, but the rift began sealing itself. The stone circle cracked down the middle, the mirrors shattered simultaneously, and the shadows returned to falling downward, as shadows should. Patricia Martinez died peacefully in her daughter's arms 17 minutes later, her heart simply stopping after completing the impossible task of bringing her family home. Her final words were, "Now we're all together again." The official reports classified the entire incident. The media was told that new evidence had been found regarding the Martinez disappearance. but no details were released. The campsite was permanently closed to the public, officially due to geological instability. Sarah and Emma Martinez underwent extensive debriefing and medical evaluation. Physically, they were exactly as they'd been 8 years earlier. No aging, no changes. Mentally, they carried knowledge of things that existed beyond human understanding. Emma never spoke publicly about their experiences in the other dimension, but she did write one final journal entry, found among her belongings after the family settled into their new life. "We're home, but home is different now. We're different. We've seen what exists in the spaces between worlds, and we know the barriers are weakening everywhere. Other doorways will open. Other families will face what we faced. But we also learned something important. Love is stronger than the darkness between dimensions. Mom and I survived 8 years of hell because we never stopped believing that someone was looking for us. Never stopped believing that love could build a bridge across impossible distances. Grandma gave her life to bring us home, but she would say it was worth it. She always said family is everything. Now I understand what she meant. The changed ones, the lost travelers we left behind, they forgot that truth. They let the darkness convince them that love was weakness, that hope was foolish. That's how the entity feeds, on despair, on the belief that connection is impossible. If you're reading this, and if you ever find yourself lost between worlds, remember, someone is looking for you. Someone loves you enough to break reality itself to bring you home. Hold on to that. Let it make you strong, and never, ever let the darkness convince you otherwise. 6 months later, Sarah and Emma Martinez quietly disappeared again. Not taken this time, but choosing to leave. They left a note for David explaining that other families were trapped in dimensional prisons. Other people needed rescue. They'd learned how to open doorways safely, how to navigate between worlds without losing themselves. Emma had mastered the binding rituals that could contain hostile entities. Sarah had developed an intuitive sense for finding lost souls in the infinite space between realities. We can't just live normal lives knowing others are suffering what we suffered, Sarah's note explained. Emma and I have become something new, guides for the lost, guardians between worlds. This is our purpose now. Jake Morrison still climbs in Antelope Canyon. He's found 3 more journals over the past year, each containing messages from Sarah and Emma as they work to rescue other displaced families. The journals report successful extractions. The climber from 1987 brought home to a daughter who never stopped hoping. The family of 4 from 1994 reunited with children who'd grown up believing they were orphans. The stone circle remains cracked and dormant. But sometimes, on nights when the stars align just right, hikers report hearing voices calling across impossible distances, not cries for help, but messages of hope for anyone else who might be lost between worlds. Agent Chen keeps all the journals in a secure facility, along with detailed records of the dimensional rescue operation. The files are classified, but he's written recommendations for establishing a permanent task force to investigate other potential dimensional weak points. The Martinez case proved that the barriers between realities are thinner than we thought, his final report concluded. Sarah and Emma are out there now, working to bring other lost families home. The least we can do is be ready to help when they need us. David Martinez still visits the cracked stone circle every year on the anniversary of his daughter's original disappearance. He brings flowers for Patricia and leaves letters for Sarah and Emma, updating them on his life and telling them how proud he is of their work. "I know you can't write back," his latest letter reads, "but I hope you know that you've given so many families what we thought we'd lost forever. Hope. Grandma would be so proud of who you've become." The letter disappeared overnight, as they always do. And somewhere in the space between worlds, a mother and daughter continue their work of bringing the lost back home, proving that some bonds are stronger than the barriers between realities. The question of what else might follow them through has been answered. Hope follows them. Love follows them. The unbreakable conviction that no one should be lost forever, that every family deserves the chance to be whole again. In the end, that might be the most powerful force in any dimension.